Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hello, everyone. It's such a treat to be a guest on Her Story Circle today. My name is Elizabeth Gould. I'm a best-selling author, speaker, neuroplastician, high-performance coach, and I'm coming to you also today from Melbourne, Australia. So how did I get to this point? Why do I talk about high performance and neuroplasticity and how we can use our brains to improve our life? Well, three things I know for sure: that positive thinking doesn't work. There's no such thing as failure, and success is backwards. So I think I really got here. I often talk about myself. I've published 3 books now. The latest is endorsed by Tony Robbins. And I'm asked about my success as an author. And I say, well, I really am the epitome of someone who technically is a failure, but as there's no such thing, I've been incredibly fortunate. So I had a corporate career. I started out as a lawyer, and then I had a number of senior corporate positions, but I yearned. I had that dream of being the next Agatha Christie. So whenever I could, I wrote murder mystery books. I wrote at least one a year for over a decade. I still have the manuscripts in my house. Every time I move, there's a couple of big boxes because I can't bear to let them go. But no one else actually liked them, and certainly no one else felt strongly enough to publish them. So when my corporate career fell apart because I was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, and I got so sick that I couldn't work towards the end, I really looked at writing books. I went to the bookshop for inspiration, basically, cancer and surviving cancer. And I thought, well, no one ever asked cancer survivors how they think. There was lots of books about eating raw vegetables and meditating and, yes, thinking positive. And we'll come back to why that doesn't work. But nothing about a group of people and what went on inside their heads, because I don't know about you, but I've always been fascinated about what goes on inside our head and how we can use those voices to move us forward to success rather than being full of doubt and fear. So I wrote a book called The Secrets of Cancer Survivors. And as I'd written all these awful books about the body in the library or the body on the boat or the body, you name it, I put a body pretty much everywhere in my unloved manuscripts. I knew how to write a book quite quickly. So I found cancer survivors, different genders, types of cancers, stages, ages, and I asked them what went on inside their head. And the book was an overnight success, published in 8 countries. And I was one of those people that suddenly was a published best-selling author. But if I hadn't have had all those years of practice with my bodies, I'm sure it should have been very different. Then I became interested. Before I got breast cancer, I was involved in a violent home invasion. My 2 small children were witnesses to that, and it was a pretty horrendous event. And then I thought, well, I've got through cancer. What about how I can help these little children cope with trauma? So I headed back to my shrine, the bookshop, and there were lots of books written about parenting and children by child psychologists. I don't know if you're a parent, but it occurred to me that, well, child psychologists see children who aren't coping. So what about those children who are having these traumatic experiences or just struggling with childhood? Let's face it, even a normal childhood can be pretty up and down. So I interviewed children and I asked teachers at a local school to identify a couple of schools. I said, can you see anyone in your class that you think is a happy child? And I wondered whether there was something going on inside those children's heads that led them to create happiness, no matter what life was throwing at them. And I found these gorgeous children between the ages of 9 and 12. And I was blessed once again. They were different stages in terms of, one was adopted, one was one of 4 kids, one was an only child. All of them had been bullied, even though none of them had been to see a child psychologist. They'd all managed to cope with life's ups and downs by themselves. And that's when I really became interested in the emotional part of it, because I was really still of this positive thinking, kind of very mainstream personal development. But the children told me it's how you feel. Not only how you feel shapes your life, but how you choose to feel. And even the youngest two, a boy and a girl, age 9, who were kind of like my younger control group, I remember the little girl saying to me, well, of course I'm happy. I choose to feel happy no matter what is happening. So then I took a break. I was quite unwell again, and I helped my husband start up a number of businesses because I'm an serial entrepreneur as well. And then I came back to write this book, Feeling Forwards, because what I uncovered through diving into neuroscience, and I'm turning that now into my doctorate, is that you can actually bend time through emotion to bring the future into your present. Okay, now we're getting into the realm of quantum physics, and I know that we don't have a huge amount of time, but I want to take you to a time where maybe you go back to your old elementary school or primary school, or you travel to a country you haven't been to before and for a long time, and all of a sudden you catch an aroma in the air, or you hear some music, and all of a sudden you're transported back even more than a decade to a moment in childhood, and the memories are so crisp and fresh, but it's the emotions that take you back through time. And I thought, well, what if I could use emotion to project you forward in time? What if I could create a way of meditating and looking at your life experience, move you forwards 5 years into the future you wanted to create, really feel in your body all those emotions of how you would be feeling whether it's being in a great relationship or starting your business or having your first book published, and then bring it back into the present and start behaving that way so you create the future in your present. Okay, let me talk about the power of emotion, and particularly the power of make-believe, but let's use science. So nothing in my book, in my writing, is about wishing and hoping and the universe is going to look after you, because if that works for you, that's great. But quite often the universe needs a fair bit of work on your part, and quite often a real poke or nudge, so you manifest exactly what you want. And yes, it is all in the science. So there were 2 experiments that really started me on a neuroscience journey. And the first was a group of elderly men, and this is a Harvard scientific experiment. There's no vague stories here in my work. There was a Harvard experiment where a group of older men were taken to a country retreat, and they were told they couldn't bring any electronic devices with them. They couldn't bring any photos. They could bring a watch, but not anything to do with a calendar or a diary, or really they were going to time travel. And then when they arrived at this hotel, it was fitted out as though they were back in time by 20 years. So they had newspapers that were 20 years old. They had television programs that were 20 years old. And if there was news in the newspapers or on the television, they were instructed to talk about the news as though it had just happened. So this was the 1970s 70s, this experiment was first done. It's been done a number of times since, but it was the 1970s, so it was back in the 50s. So who won the World Cup or who won the Rose Bowl? And they had to speak of it as though they didn't know who was going to win, and then they were very excited when that person won. So for a week, they spoke, they had music playing that was 20 years old, and they were encouraged to live back in that moment in the past 20 years ago. So before the elderly men went into the hotel, they had all their physical checked out. They had their eyesight, their hearing, their strength, their grip the grip test, and they had their cognitive ability checked as well. At the end of that week, scientifically proven, I promise, a lot of their physicality had actually gone back in time. Their cognition was better. Their eyesight had improved. One guy arrived leaning on a cane and left walking with no cane at all. So was it positive thinking that took them back in time and actually changed their physiology? No, it was the power of their emotions. They felt like they were 20 years younger, so they became 20. Really uncover more layers of this science and think, well, how could we use some of those principles to create the future you want to enjoy and start living that now? So I thought, okay, what about harnessing the power of make-believe? What about changing, okay, you want to be doing X or have the body of X or the habits of X in 5 years' time? What can you do now to make that happen? I came across another scientific experiment, much more recent, and I think it was Stanford, not Harvard this time, but once again, the science is real, I promise. And this involved two groups of college students, and this was just to do with eyesight. However, you know, when you go into one of these experiments as the trusting college student, you're never told straight up what you're in for. There's always a twist. So these two groups of students, one were dressed up as pilots, both the male and female students, whole pilot uniform. And they were put into an aircraft simulator. So they had the cockpit, it was all there. And they said, we want you to feel like a pilot, behave like a pilot, speak like a pilot. And sometime while they were in the flight simulator, there were a number of airplanes that flew past that all had serial numbers on the side of the plane. And all the student had to do, apart from make-believing they were a pilot, was to read out the numbers on the side of the plane. The other group of students weren't given anywhere near such an exciting role. They were just told to, oh, look, can you just go into this flight simulator and you're going to see some planes flying past and can you tell us the numbers on the side of the plane? I love this experiment for so many reasons, but the second reason is it's a great example of why positive thinking doesn't work. So when the students had finished reading out the serial numbers on the planes, both groups, they had their results of reading the serial numbers out compared with an eye test they had taken earlier. And the pilots' eyesight had measurably improved. Just in the 10 minutes they were in the flight simulator, make-believing they were a pilot, their eyesight had improved. And none of the students who weren't dressed as pilots, who were just told to look, just go in and have a look at the numbers, none of their eyesight had changed at all. And this is where positive thinking pops in, because there was such a marked difference in the results. The organizer of the experiment thought, okay, perhaps we've built the pilots up too much and we haven't built the other group up enough. So they got the non-pilot group back in and basically gave them a pep talk. They said, oh, guys, you know, we really need you to focus on the numbers on the side of the planes. We really need you, you know, you can do it. We think you can do better. All typical positive talk, pep talk stuff. So the non-pilot students got another go, which is quite unusual in these experiments. So they went back into the flight simulator and they read out the numbers and there was no change. There was no change in their eyesight at all. I'm looking forward to exploring all the subsequent experiments that have flowed on from this in my next book, which will be my doctorate. But what I developed is a high-performance coaching and philosophy around feeling forwards, because really what those pilot students had done is they put themselves in the place of a pilot. And what's great about pilots? Well, they have to have 20/20 vision. So the power of their emotion, feeling as though they were pilots, actually physically change their body. So they transform themselves in that way. So in Feeling Forwards, I talk about the checklists you can do. And it's also really good with my entrepreneur clients who quite often are very stressed and overworked and all those things that happen when you're starting your own business. It's like, okay, well, when you've got your business at this level, what will your day look like? What time will you be getting up? So many entrepreneurs say to me, well, yeah, I know I'm a bit overweight now because I eat pizza all the time because I'm so busy working on my invention. I can't possibly look after myself. And I'm like, well, if you were really as successful as you're planning, you wouldn't be eating pizza now. You'd be eating like the successful person you want to become. And that's how we create the future that you want to enjoy and actually make it happen.
I love the world of make-believe, Elizabeth. This is just such interesting stuff because everything does come from our imagination, right? It stems from what we are making up in our minds, and we can make anything real if we really want to.
Yes, for better or worse. I remember when my children were small, they or younger, they're all grown up now, but they would say things like, "Oh, well, I can't possibly do that." And my response was, which they didn't enjoy, my response was, "Well, if that's what you believe," and they go,
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about neuroplasticity in coaching.
mm.
Um, how do you incorporate your expertise as a master neuroplastician in your high performance coaching?
Oh, that's a lovely question because there is so much about the brain that doesn't make it to mainstream writing, but once it's always such an aha moment when I have the privilege of explaining it. And the first thing I do with my high performance clients is they come and share, and usually they come to me because they say my willpower is broken. I used to be able to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym and then do 5 hours work before anyone else was in the office, and now I can't do that anymore. And they always think it's to do with their body, and they're just not trying hard enough, and they've just lost and quite often they think it's imagination as well. And then I explain the fundamental concept of your brain. And once you understand this, your whole life will shift. And that is, you feel pain in your body, but your brain has no pain receptors. So if you cut yourself, you bleed. If you bump yourself into the furniture, you bruise. If you fall down, it hurts. But you can actually be inflicting a lot of damage on your brain, and your brain cannot tell you it's in pain. So what your brain does is it sends out all the stress signals into your body. So for example, a client I saw very recently, we're coming to the end of the year, we're working on her plans for 2024, and she said to me, and this is a very, very internationally renowned, successful CEO. She said, I can't even think about new clients at the moment. I can't be bothered. Is there something wrong with me? And I said, no. What you've done is you've absolutely depleted all the dopamine out of your brain. Now, people think about dopamine as a pleasure. We hear about dopamine hits, have a chocolate, and yes, dopamine and chocolate go together really, really well. But the other thing that dopamine does is it increases the level of motivation. So if you have a high level of dopamine, you find it easier to get up early to go for that run, or you find it easier to push through. You need a few other things in your brain as well as that, but you find it easier to push through, start something new. And because this entrepreneur had been doing a number of things, for example, working far too long without a break, not getting enough sleep, she literally had drained her brain of dopamine. So she's going away in a week or so for a retreat, and I'm going to give her some dopamine boosting exercises, which don't include chocolate. They will include coffee. Coffee actually does give you a little bit of a dopamine boost with absolutely no, well, it certainly doesn't go to your hips if you take it black, but it's much better than chocolate or alcohol or, goodness forbid, lifestyle drugs. So it's really about when I work with high performance clients, it's understanding the results of your behavior on your brain. And they're looking at how we can change your behavior to boost your brain so you can get where you want to go. For example, working in much, much shorter bursts of time. I'm talking 17 minutes. Making sure you have time during the day where you look at a tree. If you look at a tree, your brain actually relaxes and starts to produce all those neurotransmitters, all those hormones your brain needs to be creative and to move forward. So neuroplasticity sounds very complicated, but it's actually like putting your brain back together so your body feels better, so you can enjoy the life you want to have.
That's interesting. Looking at a tree. So what is the science behind the tree? I've got a tree just outside my window. This is interesting.
Well, it's called soft fascination. So your brain doesn't really like looking at man-made things all the time, because if you think about it, even I'm looking at your gorgeous self through my camera. I've got a rectangular camera. I've got a square screen. Everything is very, very hard edged, and there's no light and shade. But you think of when you look at the ocean, it's constantly moving. There are different shapes. There's different subtleties in color, from navy blue to aquamarine. And because your brain can't focus on just one thing, because there's so much going on, your brain actually relaxes. The same with a tree. You've got light and shade. You've got the wind moving the leaves. And that's why even my personal favorite right up next to the ocean is an open fire. We're lucky enough to have in one of our areas an open fire in winter. And, you find yourself mesmerized. You look into the flames and you find you can spend 5 or 10 minutes and you realize you haven't really thought of very much at all.
Space out.
Exactly. And it gives your brain a rest. I mean, your brain gets really tired. There's a myth about how much concentration juice your brain actually has in a day. You've probably only got about 4 hours of really intense concentration power in your brain. And that's only if you do all of these other things like working in shorter bursts, taking breaks, changing your focus. And we're not designed to sit and look at a screen 8 or 10 hours a day. It's certainly the road to creating your future.
I love that. So you're known for your contrarian views on positive thinking and success. Can you elaborate on these perspectives?
Well, it was a little bit I spoke about earlier about why positive thinking doesn't work, and I talked about a couple of scientific experiments, but success being backwards is something I love to share, because once you understand the concept, it really can have a major influence in how it moves you forward. So I work with entrepreneurs, and I also have a lot to do with professional athletes. Now, if you think of a professional athlete, and let's say you wander into a room and you meet someone, say you're dropping in on a friend and you meet their teenage child, and you say, as you do, the boring adult questions, "Oh, what are you thinking of doing?" And the teenager says, "Oh, I'm going to be an athlete when I grow up." And you say, or for my profession, you say, "Oh, that's amazing. What sport are you doing right now?" And the teenager says, "Well, I haven't really decided. I think I'll win a few races, and then I might get a coach, and then I might train, and then I might, do that whole diet sleep thing." And you would walk away with a very strong sense that that teenager's not going to get very far. Well, 90% of us approach our success like that teenager. And I have entrepreneurs I work with all the time that say, "Oh, look, when I get my next round of funding, I'll really get on top of the numbers," or when I have enough money to employ a personal trainer, then I'll take care of my health. When. And they're like the teenager on the couch saying, "Well, when I win a couple of races, then I'll really start to focus." Because you have to, like the true champions, Muhammad Ali is a great eternal example, but everyone else, even a couple of my son's friends who are now professional football players, they trained, ate, slept, thought like a champion way before they got picked for the football team. They worked out they had to have the attributes of a successful person now to have success in the future.
Absolutely love it. So, your crisis, your health crisis took you out of the corporate world into an entrepreneurial world. How did your experience in legal and senior corporate roles shape your approach to coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders?
That's such a lovely question, because I think when you change direction, a lot of people tend to dismiss what they've done in the past, and really that usually has the seeds where the seeds of greatness start. I think when I look back over my life, and in my book Feeling Forwards, I talk about finding your golden thread, the golden thread that winds through the tapestry of your life, whether or not it's, you're having a period of your life that's bright and colorful, or whether you're in a season that's a little bit darker. And the golden thread for me was listening to other people's stories and understanding other people's stories. When I was a lawyer, I was a litigator, which I loved, and I was a defendant litigator. So I would have to listen to what my client said happened, listen to all the witnesses, and it's what everyone said happened, but then I had to work out, so what probably did happen? That was another story. And then I had to decide on the story I wanted the judge to believe. That was another story. And when I moved out, it was all about stories for me. I loved being a lawyer. And then when I moved out of that, I was in management consulting. So then it was the story about why they hadn't been able to achieve the business change they were hiring me to do. And then I moved into executive recruitment for a long time as well, a little bit like, I know you had an incredible business in that space. And then it was listening to stories of success, or stories about why they hadn't been able to get to the next level, and stories about, sharing with my client, this is actually what I think that candidate can deliver for you. So I think meeting thousands and thousands of people before I started to write nonfiction books really shaped my ability to be curious, but then to put that down on paper.
Lessons from elite athletes. In your doctoral research, you analyze the mindset and behavior of elite athletes. What key lessons can entrepreneurs and executives learn from them?
It's very powerful lessons that can be learned, both about preparing for success, but also beyond success. Athletes don't always get it right. In terms of, there's a number of, particularly swimmer, Michael Phelps has spoken very articulately about this, but a lot of swimmers in Australia as well have spoken about standing on the podium, getting the gold medal, and sliding into depression at that point, or going back to their rooms and just sobbing, because they'd used feeling forwards, they'd used understanding that success is backwards, and they'd used it to take it to the point of the podium, but then they hadn't thought what was going to happen after that. So when I'm coaching entrepreneurs, and in particular very successful entrepreneurs, it's like, okay, we're going to talk about when you've sold your business. We're going to talk about that next step beyond, because life is, it's a little trite now to say that life is a journey, but very often people think of success as a final destination, and they haven't thought through how their life is going to work after that. So it's like, okay, and going back once again to the golden thread, well, if you've sold your business and made a potentially huge amount of money, and perhaps you've started a charity, but there's going to be a golden thread. If you were a curious person before you sold the business, you're going to be a curious person after. If you're a high energy person, well, where is that energy going to go? What are we going to replace your hours of training with? What's going to bring you joy? So it's the role of the successful entrepreneur and the successful athlete are actually quite closely intertwined.
Media and podcasting. With your extensive experience in media, including co-hosting Office Works and your podcast Feeling Forward, how do these platforms help in spreading your coaching philosophy?
So sure. It's very interesting with media work. I find it's always about the messaging. It's always about refining your message to make sure that it's current. And I probably pivot my message and my branding at least once a year. When I was finishing Feeling Forwards, Tony Robbins, I spoke to him in February 2020, and he provided an endorsement for the book, and I was all set to go. And then COVID happened, and I actually sat on the book for a while after that, because I wasn't sure that the messaging was going to be relevant. And I really wanted to make sure that it was going to be a book that would be enormously helpful, not just shelf help, but it would be actually really current. So I think when you are exposed to the media, it's always about, well, what's your message and what makes your message absolutely compelling. Your message has to have certainly be well-rounded, but it has to really fulfill a need or a pain point of someone that's listening to you. And if you're not sure about what that pain point is, then you need to go back and work on your messaging.
I'll tell you, Elizabeth, I could talk to you all day. Your work is absolutely fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing how we're going to be collaborating and working together in the near future. I've got your website scrolling at the bottom of the screen. If anybody wants to reach out, there is the website right there. And thank you so much for this interview.
Oh, look, it's been an absolute treat, Gertrude. And as I know we're going to be, this will be released in early 2024. I'd like to say that the first 5 people that would like to send me an email address to elizabeth@elizabethgould.com, I'm happy to chat with you for 30 minutes just to talk about how we can create the best possible future for you in 2024.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is attracting women from all over the world, bringing us knowledge, skills, and tools to manifest the dreams that we have. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.